Emily Carter stood by the kitchen window of her quiet home in a small town in Vermont on a chilly autumn morning, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. Outside, golden leaves drifted slowly from tall maple trees, but inside the house, everything felt still and heavy. The silence in the home had become a familiar companion over the past few years. Her husband, David Carter, had already left for work early that morning without much conversation, just a quick, "See you tonight," before the door closed behind him. Emily remained standing there for a moment, watching the empty driveway and wondering how life had become so quiet between them. 12 years earlier, when they first bought this house, it had felt full of excitement and laughter. They had painted the walls together, planted flowers in the backyard, and spent long evenings dreaming about the future. Back then, David used to come home early and they would cook dinner side by side, talking about everything from movies to travel plans. But over time, work became the center of David's world. His long hours slowly replaced their conversations, and the laughter that once filled the house became rare. Emily never blamed him completely. She knew life could become busy and complicated. Still, the distance between them had quietly grown like a shadow neither of them noticed at first. At 38, Emily was thoughtful and warm, someone who cared deeply about people and believed in loyalty. She had always been the type of person who tried to keep relationships strong, even during difficult times. But lately, she had begun to feel something she never expected inside her own marriage. Loneliness, not the dramatic kind, but the slow, quiet loneliness that appears when two people stop truly seeing each other. One afternoon, while cleaning the attic, Emily opened a dusty storage box filled with old photo albums. Curious, she sat on the wooden floor and began flipping through the pages. The photos showed a younger version of herself and David smiling widely during vacations and family gatherings. In one picture, they stood on a windy beach in Maine, laughing as waves crashed behind them. In another, they were dancing at a friend's wedding, their faces glowing with happiness. Emily touched the corner of one photograph gently and felt a strange mix of warmth and sadness. Those memories were real, but they felt very far away now. She wondered when their story had slowly changed direction. Later that evening, she prepared dinner alone again, setting 2 plates at the table, even though she knew David would likely come home late. When he finally walked through the door hours later, he looked tired and distracted, talking briefly about a busy day at the office before heading to bed early. Emily cleaned the dishes quietly, telling herself that every marriage had difficult seasons, yet deep inside she felt a growing emptiness she didn't know how to explain. A few days later, she decided to take a walk through downtown Vermont to clear her mind. The air was cool, and the small streets were filled with cozy shops and glowing cafe windows. As she walked past a charming bookstore cafe she had never entered before, she noticed people inside reading and chatting quietly. Something about the warm lights and calm atmosphere pulled her in. Emily stepped inside and immediately felt comforted by the smell of fresh coffee and the soft sound of music playing in the background. She ordered a latte and found a quiet table near a tall shelf filled with novels. For the first time in weeks, the tension in her chest eased slightly. She opened a book and began reading, letting the peaceful environment surround her. After a few minutes, she noticed someone sitting across the room near the window. A man around her age was reading a book while occasionally sketching something in a small notebook. He had a calm expression and an easy presence that made him seem approachable without trying. When he looked up briefly, their eyes met for just a second. Emily quickly looked back at her book, but the man offered a polite smile before returning to his reading. It was such a small moment that she almost ignored it, yet somehow it made the room feel a little brighter. Emily finished her coffee and left the cafe soon after, thinking nothing more about the brief encounter, but the following week she found herself returning to the same place again. The cafe had become a peaceful escape from the quiet house and the long afternoons she spent alone. To her surprise, the same man was there again, sitting near the window with a laptop this time. When Emily walked past his table to order coffee, he gave another friendly nod. "Good afternoon," he said politely. "Hi," Emily replied with a small smile before sitting at her usual table. Over the next few weeks, their simple greetings slowly turned into short conversations. She learned his name was Michael Lawson. He had recently moved back to Vermont after spending several years working in Seattle as a graphic designer. Michael explained that he liked working in quiet places, which was why he visited the cafe often. Emily noticed he spoke gently and listened carefully when she talked. Their conversations were casual at first, favorite books, local restaurants, and the peaceful charm of small towns. Yet Emily realized she enjoyed these brief talks more than she expected. Michael had a calm way of speaking that made people feel comfortable. There was no pressure, no awkward silence, just easy conversation. One afternoon, he recommended a novel he had just finished, sliding the book across the table for her to see. "It's one of those stories that stays with you," he said. Emily laughed softly. "Those are the best kind." As the days passed, Emily began looking forward to visiting the cafe again. It wasn't only the warm coffee or the quiet atmosphere, it was the simple joy of talking to someone who seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts. When she returned home each evening, she sometimes realized she was smiling without noticing. The feeling surprised her because it had been so long since anything had lifted her mood like that. Still, Emily never allowed herself to think too deeply about the new friendship forming in her life. She reminded herself that Michael was simply someone she met at a cafe, nothing more. Yet something inside her heart had started to wake up after years of silence, and she couldn't ignore the small spark of happiness she felt during their conversations. One evening, as she left the cafe, the sky turning pink with sunset, Emily paused for a moment outside the door and looked back through the window. Michael was still sitting at his table reading quietly. She smiled to herself before walking toward her car. What Emily didn't realize then was that this simple routine, coffee, quiet conversations, and an unexpected friendship was slowly leading her toward a turning point in her life. Because sometimes the smallest moments, like a friendly smile in a quiet cafe, can quietly begin changing everything. Emily began visiting the bookstore cafe more often, sometimes in the late morning and sometimes in the quiet afternoon hours, when the town moved slowly and the warm smell of coffee filled the room. Each visit started to feel familiar and comforting, like stepping into a small world where life felt lighter. Michael Lawson was often there, sitting near the window with his notebook or laptop, and over time their short greetings slowly turned into longer conversations. One rainy Saturday afternoon, Emily walked into the cafe with a book in her hand and saw Michael already sitting at his usual table, sketching something while soft music played in the background. When he noticed her, he smiled warmly and said, "Looks like we both had the same idea today." Emily laughed softly and replied, "Rainy days make this place feel even better." That day was different from the others because instead of sitting at separate tables, Michael invited her to join him. Emily hesitated for a second, then nodded and sat across from him, feeling a small nervous excitement she couldn't quite explain. Their conversation began with simple topics like books and movies, but it quickly flowed into deeper subjects. Michael talked about living in Seattle for many years and how fast the city life had been. He explained that after working long hours and feeling burned out, he decided to return to Vermont where life felt calmer and more meaningful. Emily listened with interest, realizing she understood that feeling more than she expected. She shared small stories about growing up in the area, her love for quiet mornings, and the comfort she found in reading. For the first time in a long while, Emily noticed how easy it felt to talk openly. Michael listened carefully, never interrupting, and his thoughtful questions made her feel like her words truly mattered. As the rain tapped softly against the cafe windows, time seemed to pass quickly. They talked about travel dreams, favorite childhood memories, and even the small habits that made everyday life enjoyable. Michael had a gentle sense of humor that made Emily laugh unexpectedly, and she realized how rare that feeling had become in her daily routine. When their coffee cups were empty and the rain finally stopped, Emily looked at the clock and was surprised by how many hours had passed. "I didn't realize it was already evening," she said. Michael smiled. "Good conversations do that." As Emily walked home later that evening, she felt something warm inside her chest, something she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't dramatic or overwhelming, just a quiet happiness that followed her all the way home. Over the next few weeks, Emily and Michael continued meeting at the cafe. Sometimes they planned to meet, and sometimes they simply ran into each other there by coincidence. Their friendship grew naturally, built on easy conversation and mutual understanding. Emily noticed how comfortable she felt around him. Michael had a calm presence that made people relax, and he spoke with honesty about life's ups and downs. One afternoon, he told her about a difficult period after leaving his job in Seattle when he questioned many of his life choices. Instead of pretending everything had been perfect, he spoke openly about learning to slow down and appreciate simple moments. Emily admired that honesty. It reminded her that life was not always about big achievements, but about feeling connected and understood. During one of their longer conversations, Michael looked at Emily thoughtfully and said, "You seem like someone who carries a lot inside without saying it out loud." Emily was surprised by the comment because it felt accurate. She paused for a moment before replying quietly, "Maybe I do." Michael nodded gently. Sometimes people get so used to being strong that they forget they deserve to be heard too. His words stayed in Emily's mind long after she returned home that evening. She realized that in her marriage, she had slowly stopped sharing her thoughts and feelings. It wasn't because she didn't care about David anymore. It was because their conversations had become so short and distant that it felt easier to stay quiet. Now, talking with Michael made her remember what real conversations felt like. The realization brought both comfort and confusion. Emily respected the life she had built with David, but she could not ignore the growing warmth she felt during her time with Michael. The friendship was innocent and respectful, yet the emotional connection between them was becoming stronger with every meeting. One evening after the cafe closed, Emily and Michael walked outside together. The streetlights glowed softly, and the town felt peaceful under the cool evening sky. They walked slowly down the sidewalk, continuing their conversation about books and favorite places to travel. At one point, Michael stopped near a small park and looked at the quiet street around them. "It's strange how life brings people together," he said thoughtfully. Emily looked at him with curiosity. "What do you mean?" Michael shrugged slightly. "Sometimes you meet someone unexpectedly, and they remind you of parts of yourself you forgot about." Emily felt her heart beat a little faster when he said that. She didn't respond immediately because she knew exactly what he meant. Being around Michael reminded her of the version of herself who used to laugh easily and share stories without hesitation. For years, she had quietly pushed those parts of herself aside while focusing on responsibilities and routine. Now those feelings were returning, and she didn't know how to handle them. That night when Emily returned home, the house felt even quieter than usual. David was sitting in the living room looking at his phone, barely glancing up when she entered. They exchanged a few polite words about dinner and work before the evening settled into silence again. Emily sat on the couch later, staring at the dark window and thinking about the day. She knew she hadn't done anything wrong, yet the emotional shift inside her heart was becoming harder to ignore. Her friendship with Michael had brought warmth back into her life, but it also made her realize how empty her marriage had quietly become. Over the following days, Emily tried to focus on her normal routine, but her thoughts often drifted back to the cafe and the peaceful conversations she shared with Michael. She reminded herself that he was simply a friend, someone who had entered her life during a difficult time. Still, every time she saw his familiar smile or heard his calm voice, she felt a sense of comfort that she hadn't experienced in years. One afternoon, as they sat near the cafe window watching people walk past outside, Michael said something that made Emily pause again. "You deserve to feel happy," he said simply. The sentence was gentle, not dramatic, but it stayed with her long after their conversation ended. That evening, while driving home under the fading sunset, Emily realized something important. Her growing connection with Michael wasn't just about him. It was about the part of her life that had been missing for a long time: understanding, kindness, and emotional closeness. For years, she had accepted the quiet distance in her marriage as something normal, something that simply happened over time. But now, she wasn't so sure anymore. The more time she spent with Michael, the clearer her feelings became, and the harder it was to pretend that everything in her life was fine. Emily didn't know what the future would bring, and she wasn't ready to make any decisions yet. All she knew was that her heart had begun to wake up after years of silence, and that change was both beautiful and frightening at the same time. As winter slowly approached, and the days grew shorter, Emily sensed that the friendship she shared with Michael was moving toward a moment where everything would have to be faced honestly. Because sooner or later, she would have to decide whether this connection was simply a friendship that helped her rediscover herself or the beginning of a life changing chapter she had never expected.